Delighted to say that Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform, joining me live here in Westminster, the newly engaged Richard Tice.
Thank you very much. Yes, exciting news over Christmas.
Congratulations.
I've taken the plunge on Boxing Day.
And where did you pop the question?
In a pub in the Cotswolds.
Would it be
on
anywhere
a bar
else?
stool with a glass of mulled wine, so very happy.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's talk about very serious matters, though, and of course, what's going on in Venezuela. Let's start with that. Does Reform, did you support what Trump has done?
Yeah, I don't think anybody should shed any tears for the removal of an illegitimate, brutal drugs lord who was running Venezuela. I think it's good news for the West. I think it's bad news for Putin and for the Chinese communist regime. And the question now is, the challenge now is to ensure that Venezuela doesn't descend into what happened in Iraq or Libya. And so, that's the next challenge. And obviously, the US couldn't leave a vacuum. They mustn't leave a vacuum in Venezuela. So they need to live up to what President Trump talked about yesterday in terms of running it until there are elections and a peaceful transition back to a democratic Venezuela.
I thought that Trump and MAGA, and actually Reform as well, were very sceptical about foreign entanglements.
Well, at the end of the day, you've got to do what any government, any prime minister or president has got to look after the security and interests of their own people.
But he ran against forever wars. He ran against getting involved.
But at the end of the day,
he's talking about running Venezuela.
Until there's a transition back to a democratically elected government. But at the end of the day, actually, they've concluded that Maduro and his drugs regime was against the interests of the American people in terms of the vast amounts of illegal activity,
all
of drugs,
cocaine. All independent analysis, Richard Tice shows that in terms of drug supply into the United States, very little of it comes from Venezuela. Most of it comes from Pacific routes.
Actually, that's not what I've seen. In terms of fentanyl, that's correct. But in terms of cocaine, that's not correct.
5% of American cocaine comes from Venezuela. Most of it comes from Mexico, comes from Colombia.
Figures, but there's also the brutality, the violence, the control of the cartels in the US that are essentially part of. And but all of these issues. I mean, the drug wars. This is an international war on the drug terrorists, the narco terrorists. That is the reality.
Trump was open. This isn't about drugs. This is about oil. He was really clear about it.
But there's another point to it, which is why I say the people who won't be happy is Russia and China, because, of course, they've got interests in Venezuela in terms of the oil. And who's better, actually, to be helping Venezuela use their oil reserves? Is it the US or is it Russia and China taking it for their own interests? I have to say the interest of the West is that it's the US.
Well, on that basis, would go into countries all over the world. China's got huge investments.
The reality is that there are many reasons why Maduro was very, very bad news for the West. Bad news for the UK as well. I mean, much of our cocaine, I understand, comes from Venezuela and nearby countries. So let's see. There are serious risks to what's been done. Of course, there's risks to everything, but they've concluded that it's in their strategic interest. And let's see. I mean, people forget. Just yesterday, for example, RAF Typhoons were bombing weapons depots in Syria because we conclude that's in our national interest. So this happens, in a sense. Individual governments make individual choices.
So, your leader, Nigel Farage, tweeted, put on X, the American actions in Venezuela overnight are unorthodox and contrary to international law, but if they make China and Russia think twice, it may be a good thing. I'll come back to that second bit in a moment. But he accepts, you think it does break international law?
Yeah, if you look at Article 51 of the UN rules, most lawyers would probably say, well, it's just the wrong side of the issue of self-defence. Some will say that it's just inside, because what happens now is there'll be a report sent to the UN of Article 51 saying that it's in self-defence because the state was unable or unwilling to do so. So, look, it's arguable, but the reality is, in terms of domestic US law, it's clearly self-defence.
Because Venezuela is clearly not a threat to the United States.
Why have we bombed a weapons depot in Syria? It's exactly the same point. Because ultimately, so are the drugs laws. They're terrorists carrying out violent attacks on people in the US. You look at your strategic national interest, not just tomorrow, but also months, years down the track, and you have to say what is in our national interest.
Drugs don't come from don't come from Venezuela. They come from other countries. So it doesn't make any sense.
Some do, some don't. But ultimately, you have to say, as a government, as a leader of a country, you say, what is in our strategic national interest? They've concluded it is. I have to say, the people who will regret this is Russia and China, and that's a good thing.
65%.
And also, remember, the other key thing is what Trump said yesterday about Putin. He said that he was not thrilled with Putin. In Trump language, that probably means that he's very angry with Putin.
But you mentioned
and in a sense,
drugs.
that's a good thing for the security of Ukraine, for example.
You mentioned drugs. 65 to 70% of our cocaine comes from Colombia. Should we be going into Colombia? Should we be taking out Colombia on the basis of this? Should we be taking out the Colombian leader?
No, what I'm saying is you've got to look at what is in your individual strategic interest.
But why not?
Well, we look at defending ourselves from drugs. We have our own war on drugs, which sadly we're losing.
So let's take out the Colombians then.
No, that's what I'm saying is individual governments have to make individual choices based on also what we're able to do.
So if our government came along, if Keir Starmer said, look, we're concerned about drugs as well and the war on drugs. As I say, 70% of our cocaine comes from Colombia. We're going to kidnap the Colombian president. You'd be like, go for it.
Just yesterday, John Healey, our defence secretary, said that actually ISIS, on a strategic view, is bad for the UK. That's why we're bombing weapons depots in Syria, and I support that.
And you've cited what Trump has said about drugs, and therefore we've got a drugs problem as well. So therefore, should we be should we consider taking out and kidnapping and abducting and extraditing?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is
South American leaders.
Countries in the West, countries in the West are losing drug wars and will make individual choices about how to respond to it. Because the truth is that the money and the violence and the armed conflict that comes from the drugs wars. I mean, essentially, Maduro has been leading a cartel that's been running Venezuela, and much else has essentially sort of.
Most of their drugs didn't come from Venezuela. It doesn't make any sense.
Substantial amount of drugs from Venezuela comes into the UK.
More comes from Colombia, more comes from Mexico.
And Europe. And it's all bad.
Yeah, sure. So that's what I'm saying. So on this basis, let's call it the Trump doctrine. You support Trump. Drugs are a huge problem. Let's take out the Colombians, Richard. Let's go for it.
Drugs are a huge problem. And the Americans have concluded that's in their strategic interest. And we've got a drugs problem. We deal with it in our ways. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Nigel Farage also said, as the second part of that tweet, if they make China and Russia think twice, it may be a good thing. Why would it make China and Russia think twice? About what?
About essentially the confidence of President Trump to respond to situations. And what he alluded to with regard to his view on Putin, I think is very significant, underestimated by people. But what he said, he's not thrilled with Putin. I think in terms of what that means, hopefully, in terms of the security guarantees given to Ukraine as part of trying to get to an acceptable ceasefire and ultimately peace in Ukraine, I think that's important. We shouldn't in any way underestimate that. Let's hope that continues.
Might it not be the case that Russia and China take a very different message from this, which is great. We've been saying for a long time, we've all got spheres of interest. The US have got the Western Hemisphere. We've got our spheres of interest. Might is right. We'll do what we like.
Well, I take a different view. I take the view that actually, the Chinese literally had a special envoy and a delegation in Venezuela this week talking presumably about oil because, China needs oil. So, if we can do actually, if Trump and has essentially given them pause for thought, then I think that is a good thing against the Chinese communist regime. Let's remember that is what they are. They are a communist regime. And what he said about Putin, again, will make Putin think. And I think that is important. It may well have an influence on negotiations around Ukraine.
What if the Chinese think, the leader of Taiwan is deleterious to our national security, so we're going to abduct him?
I think what they'll think is that actually President Trump should not be underestimated, and that will give them pause for thought.
What if Putin decided to abduct Zelensky?
They're all what ifs.
Would you say that was all right?
What they show is that President Trump is not to be underestimated, and I think that will give Putin and the Chinese communist regime pause for thought. Who knows? Obviously there are challenges ahead. The Americans now have got to make sure that Venezuela doesn't descend into chaos. That I think is a key thing, but I hope that actually this is good news for the West, and this gives serious pause for thought to Putin and the Chinese regime.
Emily Thornberry said to me this morning she thinks that Trump's unwell. What do you think of that? Do you think he's well?
He looked pretty alert and well to me when he was giving his press conference.
He looked pretty sleepy. I'm sure it had been a long day for him abducting a foreign leader.
He clearly hadn't been to sleep through the night, and he was reading a very important press statement. But when he was answering questions from the press, he was as alert and engaged as we usually see him.
Do you think the British government's line on this is correct this morning?
Darren Jones has been doing the rounds and was basically just sort of sitting on the fence saying nothing, which they've got a problem on the left because many of the socialists in the Labour Party would prefer Maduro to Trump, which I think tells you a lot about the socialist regime running the country.
They might just think, I haven't heard anyone in the Labour Party expressing any admiration for Maduro, but what they probably think is that it's not a very good idea for the world's most powerful country to go around the world abducting people.
Well, at the end of the day, he's an indicted narco-terrorist under US law. Under US law. And so they've made that decision. And frankly, let's, what we hope now is that for the Venezuelan people, they will get the prospect to be better off under a properly democratically elected government.
What if they fancy taking someone from this country just because they want to? Well, that's all right?
Well, that's what international warrants for arrest are.
Yeah, and you need to respect international law.
And let's just remind ourselves, the US, the UK and the EU have viewed Maduro as an illegitimate dictator for many, many years. And he's an indicted narco-terrorist. There is suggestion and talk in Magaland about other potential territorial acquisitions or in the Western Hemisphere. You may have seen Stephen Miller's wife, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, tweeting a picture of Greenland with a big American flag across it saying, soon. Would you urge your friends in the MAGA world to leave Greenland alone? We're talking about Venezuela. We're not talking about Greenland. I think that's for the birds. But surely you would think it was a bad idea if they would invade Greenland. Yeah, I don't think they'll do that, and I don't think that's a good idea, obviously. And so you would tell your friends in MAGA that it would be bad. They should. Did you say sell or tell? At the end of the day, on the issue of Venezuela, Maduro has gone, and I think that's good for the West. Panama Canal? Should Trump take that? He said he wanted that before. Are we against that? Take Trump seriously. Don't take every word literally. He's acting what they perceive are the American interests. They've indicted Maduro many years ago. So no one should be that surprised by what has happened. And it will give a lot of dictators and repressive regimes around the world pause for thought. Do you, looking at domestic politics for a moment and what's ahead for your party in 2026, what does success look like for Reform in 2026? Doing really well in the May elections, winning control of more councils, including some councils around London. We've got a big rally this coming Friday, where there'll be over 2,000 people launching our London campaign, and doing well in Wales and Scotland. I think we're going to surprise on the upside. Of course, there are challenges. You go up and down in the polls. Well, let's see. We're not taking anything for granted. We're going to be working incredibly hard. But I think there's a poll out today by More in Common showing Reform, if there was a general election, I think this week essentially, that we would win 380 seats plus. So look, we've got a lot of work to do, but we're doing well so far. Do you want more defectors from the Tory party? Do you want any more, or actually is it time you think actually no more? Enough? Well, we're not going to give a running commentary. Let's wait and see. But we welcome people who share our values and our principles. Is there a danger in having so many defectors? Because it's easy then to portray you as just a Tory party reborn. At the end of the day, we need to focus on our common sense approach to making people better off, to cutting wasteful government spending, cutting daft regulations, and then you can afford performance-related tax cuts. Then we can make people better off. And I think that is one of the key things that people are focused on, and that's why I think people will vote Reform. Are you having an inquiry into what happened with Nathan Gill? No, we're not. No. At the end of the day, there's a government inquiry, and I said in the House of Commons to Steve Reed, I trust that looks at the impact, the influence of the Chinese Communist regime in the Labour Party, for example. because the government's doing their own inquiry into foreign influence, into electoral
You got
politics.
10 years.
And
It was so serious. Surely you'd want to just check, just as a matter. I mean, you're supposed to be a serious party of government. You could be in government in 3 years,
And
or
we
whatever
are,
it is.
and we are.
Surely it would just be worth having a look, just checking that there weren't any other attempts to try and subvert members
One
of the
bad
party
apple.
by the
One
Russians.
bad
But how
apple.
do you know unless you have the inquiry?
we know who we are, we know what we are, and that is the reality.
How do you
What I
know?
do know, because we know who's in the party now, and
You didn't know
very
about Nathan
comfortable.
Gill.
That was years ago. One bad apple. You know, there are bad apples in the Labour Party. I mean, look at Barry Gardner, right, receiving hundreds of thousands of pounds
I don't
worth
want
of
to talk about Barry
donations.
Gardner. I'm not talking about Barry Gardner. I'm talking about your party
I'm
because you're
talking
in
about-
charge of your
I'm
party.
talking
I'll
about-
ask the Labour Party about that. Why not just have that inquiry so the country
There is
can rest assured,
a
because it was really
there is a
serious
national
what happened.
review of foreign influence in British politics, and we welcome that. As I said in the House of Commons, and I trust that will look at the influence of the Chinese communist regime in the Labour Party that is about probably to grant consent
Why
for
are you
a
saying
super...
look over there? Why don't you get your own house in order?
Because they're the government,
You
they're the
could be the
party
government.
in government, and whilst they throw accusations against us, I'm going to make sure that this looks at them as well, because there are serious concerns.
But if you had
about
that
the
inquiry,
influence-
Richard Tice,
That-
then
there
you'd
is
be able
that
to
inquiry.
say, we've had that inquiry
If I had that
internally.
inquiry, do you know what you'd say? Oh, it was internal. You didn't find anything. I don't trust it. I want a national inquiry. You
No,
absolutely
I
would.
wouldn't say that.
That's what,
I would
that's,
say-
that's what you
I
and
would
everybody else would say. Much better have a national inquiry and look at the whole picture.
So we can't trust the inquiry that you'd have? It's not worth having.
Including the Chinese communist regime's influence in the Labour Party that's about to grant consent for a mega embassy in a strategically important part of the city
You're
of London.
100% confident that the Russian government made no other attempts to subvert anyone in your party.
I am
at
very
any point.
confident. I'm very, very confident that that everything is being done properly and correctly in reform, and that's why we're leading in over 170 national polls, give or take 10% ahead of any other party. Do you know what? Actually, people, they want reform, and if you want reform, you've got to vote reform.
Are you worried? There is a lot of speculation, I think maybe a bit overdone at the moment, but there's some speculation, some commentary that reform's peaked. Has reform peaked?
We haven't peaked, but obviously, you know, polls don't go up in straight lines in the same way markets don't move in straight lines. We're taking a strategic pause for breath as we move forward, keep accelerating. But obviously, the higher you go, the harder it is to go ever higher.
You're going to have to have a pause for breath at some point because you're going to have your honeymoon with your new wife.
Well,
I
there
see
is
the
that
point
as well.
of Richard Tice. Richard Tice.